like most of the attendees have connected, and we can start with the webinar. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Sten Anspal. I am from the Estonian Center for Applied Research Center, and I'm very glad today to introduce this webinar. Our topic today is the future of maritime shipping, which of course plays an extremely important role in the functioning of the global economy and the global supply chains. And also I should mention that this event is organized as part of a foresight project on shipping and maritime economy until 2040, commissioned by the Foresight Center and carried out by the Estonian Center for Applied Research. And I'm very happy and honored to welcome our distinguished speaker, Mr. Patrick Verhoeven, who is Managing Director at the International Association of Ports and Harbours. This is a global alliance of ports representing some 180 ports in 90 countries, and its member ports handle over 60% of the world's seaborne trade. Mr. Verhoeven has kindly agreed to give a presentation about the trends and developments in the world of maritime shipping, and also touching on the present situation with COVID-19. Then following his presentation, Mr. Tõnis Hunt from the Estonian Maritime Academy at Tallinn University of Technology will follow up with some comments and questions. And after that, we will have time for questions from the audience and discussion. Everyone who wants to ask a question can click on the Q&A button on the menu bar at the bottom of the screen. The questions will be visible to everyone. After the presentations, we'll pose the questions to the presenters and we can have some discussion. And so, without further ado, please, Mr. Patrick Verhoeven, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sten. Thank you, Tõnis, and good afternoon to all of you. It's, well, I would say it's a pleasure to see you all, but I don't see you all, but at least I know you're there. I'm joining you from Antwerp in Belgium, where it's a beautiful summer day today, very nice weather. I think in this crisis, of course, most days look the same because we're all stuck at home, at least most of us, going from one conference call to another webinar, and you know, that fills the day quite easily. I was in a call this morning in the Mediterranean with the Mediterranean Ports Association. At lunchtime, I was in the call, you could say, in London with the international shipping community, and I am very pleased to be, at least virtually, in Estonia, in Tallinn, I suppose, where is your capital, and which I had the pleasure to visit many times in the past, and I hope we'll be able to do so again soon. So I've got a presentation which is, of course, a lot COVID related, because when we talk about trends in the shipping industry, a lot of these issues are now also in question as to what is going to happen to our sector. How have we withstood, how have we sort of performed during the crisis, and what is going to be the situation when we hopefully get out of the current, at least the current lockdown situation. So I'm going to share my screen with you so that we can have a look at the PowerPoint, which makes it always a little bit easier to follow the track. You should be able to see that now, I hope. Great. So a few things, starting with what is the present impact? How do we experience the crisis at the moment within our sector? What is the evolution? A few words about the outlook from a trade perspective, and then some of the trends that we were perceiving before the crisis broke out. How will they change, remain the same, go in a totally different direction following this crisis? So that's a little bit the storyline for the next 10 to 15 minutes, and then I look forward to discussing those with you. If we look at the present impact in our organization, we've been sort of monitoring on a weekly basis how ports are feeling the impact of the crisis. We have a weekly survey that goes out to our members and also to non-member ports, and we ask them every week the same questions. The questions are related to the impact on vessels calling at the port, on restrictions that have been introduced as a result of the crisis or lockdown measures, any delays that are there as a result of the procedures introduced in ports, and then more broadly the impact on hinterland transport, on capacity utilization, including warehousing, and also the impact on people, the availability of the different categories of workers in our industry. And we started the process in the beginning of April, and we are now in the 7th week, where you can see on this graph week by week the evolution. We asked the ports actually to compare the situation with what would be, let's say, normal, what would have been the situation in a non-crisis sphere. If you look at the vessel calls, and this is a simplification of the barometer because the report itself is a lot more detailed. This is the dashboard. This just gives you the snapshot of what's going on. But a clear implication from the beginning is, of course, on vessel calls on passenger vessels, because that is a direct result from the fact that the cruise industry has completely stopped. There is no cruise tourism. So obviously the number of ports reporting decline in passenger traffic is the highest compared to container ships and other cargo vessels. You see an evolution there, towards the second quarter, the impact on the cargo and container vessels is higher than before, which is the result of the fact that the number of shipping lines have indeed cancelled sailings. The issue of restrictions and delays on procedures was more outspoken in the beginning of the crisis, and of course now, as we are exiting from lockdown, we don't see any new restrictions being introduced. Impact on hinterland has also been improving slightly from a global perspective, certainly from the truck point of view. And then the capacity utilization, especially if you look at essential cargoes, was higher in the beginning of the crisis than at the moment. And the situation for workers has been overall fairly stable if we look at the picture there. This is of course global, and that means it hides regional differences. And the more we get into into the situation, the more of course these regional differences are becoming more outspoken, because the crisis has moved from a peak in Asia to a peak in Europe to North America. We are now, Asia has been exiting from lockdown already before us. We are now in the process of exiting. But for instance, a region like South America is still in the middle of it and has maybe not even reached the peak yet. So that's why in the last weeks, we've been introducing regional focus in the report, and you can find those on our website. I will give you the link at the end of the presentation. And from now on, we will also, in every report, so as for the next barometer, we'll also compare our indicators regionally, so that it's more, let's say, interesting to see how the crisis is affecting different parts of the world. Overall, I think I would say, and that was echoed in many other conversations I had within the industry, overall, I think the shipping and logistics sector has performed rather well during the crisis. I think that there was at no point that supply chains were really endangered, whether it's about essential goods like medical, foodstuffs and others, or general consumer goods. I think supply chains have been resisting well on this crisis. At least that is the impression that we get from our perspective, and that I also hear from colleagues in other parts of the chain, shipping community, shippers and other players. Of course, everybody that's sort of the monitoring situation, what goes on at the moment. Of course, everybody's looking now at the future and say, how is this going to affect business in general, and more particularly in our case, as we depend on trade, what will be the sort of scenarios for trade? And this is what the World Trade Organization published in the beginning of January as a sort of scenarios as to what could happen, an optimistic scenario and a pessimistic scenario, which represents a drop between 13 and 32% for 2020, according to their forecast. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty still out there around this. So the precise economic impact is still difficult to predict, but even in the optimistic scenario, which is the green line towards the right of the slide, even for the optimistic scenario, WTO at least seems to expect that the impact will exceed the impact of the last dip that we had, which was the global financial crisis in 2008 and 2009. Also, what is a comment that I heard several times is that, of course, the financial crisis was a different animal than this crisis. In itself, it's a virus, but it's not the virus as such that has affected trade. It's the government measures that were taken as a result of the virus that have affected trade. So the lockdowns, first in Asia, then in Europe, North America, and other parts of the world. That is really what is affecting trade, and how that will impact, that we will see how quickly things can go back to normal, and what sort of measures will stay in place for the foreseeable future will also have an impact, of course. And one certainty, and then we come to let's say, trends in our sector. One certainty is that the 1.5 meter economy, as some people call it, or social distancing, will remain there with us for a foreseeable time, at least until there is a vaccine that will be widely available worldwide, so that people can indeed avoid getting the virus. I mean, nobody knows yet about potential second peak and how that is going to affect. Of course, in an industry like ours, we can't put everybody to telework and stay at home. That would be a bit complicated. People need to load and unload ships. People need to work in warehouses. People need to drive trucks and trains and barges and everything. So social distancing and operations is going to be one of the major issues for our industry. And that's, of course, also an area where innovation comes in. And what you see on the picture here is just one example from a company called Rombit, who sort of had already a device that workers wear on their arm, sort of watch, that warns them when they come too close to dangerous situations in terminals. So if there are, mobile cranes or other equipment in the neighborhood, that thing warns you. But the same technology can be easily used to make sure that you're not too close to another person. And that is what they develop now as a sort of upgrade of their initial innovation. And this is going skyrocket. Ports all over the world are ordering this now. So you can see that the crisis, to some extent, for some companies, can also have a silver lining and bring new business through innovation. There are many other things that are under consideration, and the balancing act here will be, of course, between protection and privacy, because, of course, the more technology you are going to introduce on people and their working conditions, and the more you're going to monitor, of course, the more you may get into conflict with privacy considerations, and that's going to be a big one, I think, for people working in physical circumstances like imports, like in our industry. There are also guidelines now under development by the World Health Organization, specifically for working in maritime environments. Because one of the issues is, a port community is very diverse. You've got a lot of stakeholders in that community. You've got the port management, you've got the operators, but you've got also, all the transport modes that come together in a port, including shipping and rail and so on. And a lot of people interact with each other. And that creates a lot of nervousness. And we've had, over the past weeks, especially problems with ships, ship crews that are sort of concerned from, that they might catch a virus or become contaminated by people coming on board, not wearing maybe the suitable equipment or protective gear. And that's why the World Health Organization is now developing these guidelines for our sector to make sure that people can interact still in a safe possible way. That brings us, of course, also to the question of digitalization, which is another, I would say, one of the three major trends that are affecting our industry, and I think it's not that different from other industries, but it's digitalization, it's decarbonization. I will mention that in a minute. And of course, disruption has become a trend as well, because we're in 20 years in the 21st century, and this is the third disruption we had after 9/11, the financial crisis, and this virus. So it looks like disruption is part of, you know, whatever a new normal situation is going to be. Now, I mentioned that the port community and the maritime community at large is a diverse community with a lot of stakeholders involved, a lot of interaction, physical interaction, but of course a lot of interaction also in terms of data exchange and paperwork. As I said, the maritime supply chain has actually performed rather well during the crisis because we have seen few real hiccups, but at the same time, and that's good news. At the same time, of course, we see how dependent we are still in our business on personal interaction on the one hand, but also on paper interaction. And I'll give you an illustration. Our regulator as a global maritime industry is a United Nations agency called the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, based in London. They have 174 member states that are member of IMO. So these are all maritime nations, mostly, you know, shipping nations. Of those 174, there are only 49 countries that have ports with digital platforms like port community systems. A port community system is, you could say, is the basic digital platform that you have in a port for all stakeholders to communicate, exchange documents, you know, data and so on. It's not a novel concept because it's been around since the 1980s already. So, but on a global scale, 174 maritime countries, only 49 today have ports that have this basic digital platform. And it's not just a matter of, you know, developed versus developing countries, because a country like the United States, for instance, has only one port today that has a port community system, and that's the Port of Los Angeles. So none of the other ports have this. So that shows how, globally speaking, and Europe is, you know, is among the more progressive, let's say, countries where percentage-wise more ports would have digital platforms, but still, it means there is a huge opportunity still to accelerate digitalization in our sector, and that's something that, as a trade organization, we've been saying and we've been advocating towards governments nationally, but also internationally, like EU and IMO, to accelerate the pace, so that at least in every port you would sort of have the basic platform available for electronic commerce and electronic exchange of documentation, so that you become less reliant on paperwork. Paperwork is now, and physical interaction is now shown to be risky from a virus point of view, but of course it's also not efficient. It creates a lot of bureaucracy. It is a source for potential corruption. I mean, you fight a lot of evils with you know, accelerating digitalization in a sector which is as connected globally as we are. So we're working on those recommendations and see that clearly as a trend which was already there, but it's clearly a trend that as a result of the virus, we might see, and hopefully we'll see, acceleration. I'm not sure whether the answer is as straightforward when we concern the other D, decarbonization. We have to go back to the COP, what was it, COP21 in Paris, the climate agreement a couple of years ago. One of the conclusions, or one of the things that caused a lot of, I would say, criticism at the time, is that shipping was not part of that agreement. Shipping was outside. Same thing with aviation. And of course, shipping as such is, if you look at what shipping performs, I mean, the number of goods that the industry transports over the distances, if you compare those emissions to the ton kilometers that are performed, shipping is doing actually very well compared to other modes of transport, especially compared to aviation. But of course, as such, because we're such a huge industry and we're transporting so much cargo, the footprint is very high. I think it's comparable to a country like Germany or something that's the sort of annual emissions, carbon emissions. So that criticism has been very strong, sort of following the Paris Agreement, and that has put a lot of pressure on our global regulator, which is the IMO that I mentioned before, to come up with a strategy to decarbonize the shipping industry. And they've come to an agreement in 2018, setting a number of targets. And the most important target is that the shipping industry needs to reduce its carbon emissions with 50% by 2050 compared to 2008 levels. That was the strategy adopted in 2018, and we are now in the implementation of that strategy. But two things happened. Well, first of all, because of the crisis, the IMO could not meet. There were supposed to be two very important meetings in April, where decisions on phase 1 of implementation of the strategy would have been taken. Those have, not taken. Those meetings have not been held, and with a UN agency like IMO, 174 countries, so many languages, translation, everything, it's not so easy to do a video conference. They're now kind of looking into ways of still taking those decisions that were planned for April, to at least be able to take them in autumn, so that first phase can be covered. The commitment from the IMO is certainly there from the Secretariat. On the call this morning with the Mediterranean ports, there were representatives of the IMO who confirmed that this remains their absolute priority. But the question is, what is the appetite of those that will have to pay for the investments? The shipping industry, but also the wider supply chain, because in the end, what we're looking at now in phase 1 of this strategy is the low-hanging fruit. It's increasing efficiency, port call optimization, so that ships don't have to wait before they get to the port and can sail immediately without spending emissions. But the real game changer is going to be what's going to be the fuel of the future. From heavy fuel oil to diesel to, we need something that is carbon free, with hydrogen or methanol, or several options are being investigated. But the cost of it is tremendous. And the cost is actually, percentage-wise, not so much on the ships or new ships that need to be constructed or ships that need to be converted, but the cost is in the supply chain, is in the production of the fuel, making the fuel available in the main bunkering ports around the world. That is where 85 or 86% of the cost of the investment will be. And who is going to pay for that? That was already a major question before the crisis, and it has become even a bigger question now. And you see headlines like the ones I have here on the slide. Some people saying, well, it's actually an opportunity to speed up things. But from an industry point of view, you hear ship owners, in this case, European ship owner community, who said, well, we're in a tough crisis, it's survival. We're not sure whether we will be able to invest in decarbonization the way we were planning to do it before the crisis. So that's going to be a very important topic for the coming months, to see, is this strategy still on track? Are we still able to reduce by 50%, with 50% by 2050? As I said, the problem is not the IMO as such, because they stick to their strategy, but what will be the possibility for the industry to make the investments that are needed? I think that's another major trend that has a slightly different perspective. And then coming back to our business, and I show you here a photo of what was at some point the largest container ship in the world, the MSC Gulsund, but those records are broken rather fast, because every 2 months there might be a bigger ship. I could just as well have shown you a cruise ship here, because it's the same trend. It's mega, it's all based on economies of scale. Our industry has gone through a tremendous evolution in that sense during the last 20 to 30 years. Before the crisis, there was already a discussion and criticism as to whether this approach is still viable and sustainable. Of course, from the shipping point of view, the company point of view, it makes sense. But these ships have to dock somewhere in ports, and that cargo has to be offloaded somewhere and has to get on roads and rail and inland waterways to get to its destination, and vice versa? And do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the capacity? Also, from a revenue point of view for ports, most ports, at least in Europe, but I think generally in the world, are what we call landlord ports. That means that the infrastructure is managed by a port authority. Most of the time that will be a government-owned entity, either by a municipality or by a central government. And the actual operations, so the loading, offloading, warehousing, and all the rest of it, is done by private companies who lease land from the port authority. The revenue basis of the port authority is very much linked to volume, because they have basically two incomes. One is that what they collect directly from the ships, and the other is what they collect from their tenants, whose business is also dependent on volume. Now, with 3 crises already in the 21st century, with each time a big impact on volumes, exactly because we're dependent on global trade, your business model is becoming pretty vulnerable if you don't look for other opportunities for revenue generation. So I think, and again, something that came up during the conversation this morning and in other conversations, I think ports will be starting to look at maybe other ways to generate revenue, not to become so dependent on volume and prices that have an effect on volume. And there are possibilities in energy transition, in digital transformation, and maybe also smart logistics to enter into different spheres of business than ports have been going so far. So that's another trend that I could see forthcoming and maybe being reinforced as a result of this crisis. And then finally, on to sort of, bring a positive note, not that I've been so negative so far, but to bring a really positive note, this crisis has brought people together, even if physically it was not possible. But I see that, you see that across the world, a lot of support for the sectors that have been essential, like medical sectors and others that keep people, that take care of people and make sure people have food on their plates. And of course, our industry is part of that, because we keep the supply chains going, and it has brought positive attention to our industry, and especially to the people working in our industry. And one of the major issues, which is still not quite resolved, is the issue of crew changes. So ship crews are typically, for a number of months on board of a ship serving their contract, and then they are relieved and replaced by another crew. But because of the travel bans in many countries, that was not possible. So a lot of seafarers have stayed much longer on board of their ships than they would normally have done, with all the consequences you can think of, social, psychological, medical in some cases. And the industry has really come together in paying attention or getting attention from government to problems like that. And that is quite unique, because our sector is pretty fragmented. If you look at the number of industry organizations that are represented in the IMO, so next to the member states, easily 30, 40, 50 industry organizations, international organizations like the one that I represent, usually with very different points of view. I see that in this crisis we've really come together as an industry. We have weekly calls to discuss these and other operational problems. Every Wednesday, we just had a call today at 1 o'clock. That is, to me, something I haven't seen before, not to that extent. So maybe you never know what happens once the real pressure is off, but I would hope in any case that that positive vibe that we've seen through our industry in sort of teaming up and working collectively, and that would be very beneficial also for decarbonization and digitalization. Maybe that has brought us one step further collectively. So with that sort of positive indication, I would like to end. Just to give you this link, which I mentioned in the beginning, which is our information portal on COVID-19, where you find the economic impact reports, you find guidance documents there, you find information on regulations, restrictions, but also news updates. And if I may, in a webinar, advertise another webinar. This is one that we're organizing in a series of 9 webinars over the next year, coronavirus webinars on various issues, various of the trends that I've just been mentioning. And the next one is on the 10th of June, and that will be on the ship-shore relation. And you see here the Secretary General from IMO who will be there, Secretary General, my colleague from the Chamber of Shipping, and the CEO of the Port Authority of Singapore. So that's the next one. So with a little publicity shot, I would like to end my introduction, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And now I would like to give the floor to Tõnis with follow-up questions. And I would like to remind the audience that you can, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button to ask the questions.
Thank you, Sten. Thank you, Patrick, for your interesting presentation. It was interesting to hear how unexpected and abrupt crisis has affected long-term trends in maritime transport, trends like digitalization, decarbonization. Here in Estonia, we saw a huge rise in e-commerce during COVID-19, though it didn't do any good to maritime transport, unfortunately. But as I have understood, the e-commerce is one rising trend what influences the transport sector and logistics sector. Shipping companies, especially in container sector, struggle even more with overcapacity, which is a long-term trend what we have here. And right now they make some quite a lot of blank sailings, and this kind of overcapacity is still a big problem for sector. And it seems that so many of long-term trends got sort of unexpected impetus from this crisis, and we'll see how whether it is positive or negative. I think time will tell. I prepared some questions to you, Patrick. Some of them got already answers through your presentation, so I don't ask those. But I would like to come to one topic, and this is the trade patterns or cargo moving patterns. When we talk about long-term trends, cargo moving patterns comes into mind, and I would like to ask how alternative corridors like land bridge from China to Europe, maybe Northern Sea route, what developments do you foresee in those corridors, and how do they affect this normal East Asia to Europe maritime sea route, southern sea route?
It's difficult to say what the impact of the crisis will be on it, but one impact we do see already, and that is, interestingly enough, a combination of the low oil price and the fact that Suez Canal is rather expensive in terms of the fees that you have to pay, that some shipping lines have taken the old route along the Cape of Good Hope. So the long route from Asia to Europe. That is a direct consequence of what's happening. Yeah, indirectly, you could say, as a result of the crisis, it's more related to the oil price impact. The other two that you mentioned, especially the Belt and Road, which is the China strategy, indeed, to connect, to the mainland. There's a lot of talk about it. There's a lot of, the number of conferences that were organized by China on this topic have been tremendous. I'm not sure to what extent it would be really the game changer for the Far East Europe shipping route. Clearly, there will be an impact, but then mostly, I think, from places in more central China that would find a way to Europe. It has an impact on certain new hub development. Countries like, the Caspian Sea, like Azerbaijan and others, they clearly see this as an opportunity. They were investing in new logistics facilities. Also, international operators like Dubai Ports World has been investing in strategic hubs on the land-based corridor. But whether there's tremendous evidence or whether we will have tremendous evidence in the next years that that is going to be a real game changer, I find that very difficult to predict at this stage. I mean, the whole strategy, people say it's a strategy from China, but is it really a strategy, or is it more, you could say it's almost more a sort of a marketing campaign for a number of investments indeed that China is making around the world? But is it really that sort of a dedicated vision to move cargo from here to there? I don't know. The same is actually true for the North Sea Passage or Northern Sea route, which is also something that's been widely publicized as a potential alternative. And there have been sailings and there have been crossings from one to the other, but not to a point that it's been a sort of a commercial success already. That I think they've been more anecdotal and occasional, and main problems remain, as far as I recall. The infrastructure, ports along the route, especially in Russia, the safety, because you're still dealing with extreme weather conditions over there, and the availability of nautical services. So there's a whole list of potential barriers to a commercial exploitation. Of course, the impact of greenhouse gases and climate change will maybe alter that in the future. But so far, what I see, or at least perceive, is that from the sort of the Northern Cape is a destination, certainly for certain types of traffic. But as a passageway, I don't think it is still there among the potential competitors to the classic route via Suez from Far East to Europe. But yeah, what is going to be the impact of now COVID-19? It's a crystal ball for me. The only noticeable influence, as I see, is because of the oil price. You see that impact on the longer route, which is very interesting. And will that persist or not? Well, that depends on how the oil price will evolve, no doubt.
Thank you, Patrick. Yesterday I was in Talk Digital conference. They said this exact same thing, actually, that they have seen that container ships have started to travel through Southern Africa instead of Suez. And as I recall, the MSC, I think, was making statement that the Northern Sea route maybe it's not so good in terms of climate change. It's making more climate impact than the other routes. So I have actually another question concerning this trade corridors. Do you see that in 20 or 30 years, new production regions like India emerge, and which effect they could have to existing trade lanes?
I think, well, to some extent, of course, India is already a player there, and I guess you're also referring to the question whether we will see more regionalization rather than globalization.
Yes.
And there I also hear very conflicting views. I mean, some people saying that already, again, before the crisis, because of protectionism and some of the trade barriers that were introduced, the US-China war and things like that might be already a driver towards more regionalization, and that this crisis could even accelerate it or reinforce it. But on the other hand, as I said in the beginning, the global supply chains have actually kept up well during the crisis. It's not that we've seen that many disruptions in it. So I'm not sure whether that trend is going to continue, whether it's again something that people talk about and say this could happen, but whether it's really going to happen and production will come closer to where the consumption is, I'm not so sure. I don't think that, at least it's difficult to even forecast 5 years, but I'm just basing myself on indications that I get from people who are better in crystal ball gazing than me, that it's not going to happen sort of like this is going to be the next thing, and that would also have, if it would happen, it would have could have positive consequences for things like short sea shipping, or intra-European shipping, shorter distance shipping. And clearly some ports are looking at that as maybe potential opportunities, but I don't think that we're seeing the end of globalization, or not the end of globalization, but that we will see globalization being replaced so soon by more closer to home sort of production and consumption. I don't think so.
Okay, thank you. And as Monty Python said, and now something completely different question.
I'm a big fan of Monty Python. So
me too. So one question about this autonomous shipping and autonomous transport. I think crystal ball question actually, but what do you think when they start to make some kind of impact in shipping? Autonomous ships, I mean.
I think it will take a long time. Well, when I say that, I have to be more precise. I think they may come sooner on shorter distances. Definitely on ferry services, I can see an introduction coming sooner. But for deep sea traffic, I think that's going to take a long time before that is going to be there. I mean, it's one of those things again where there's a lot of publications, conferences, events. Of course, IMO is also preparing for it. They're now revising or reviewing the regulatory framework that is in place, so on safety and so on, to see whether it is fit for purpose for automated ships. But I don't think it's going to be the large-scale application. Is not going to be for the next 10 years. I don't think so. I think on short sea, yeah, smaller vessels, you could see it. But not on deep sea trade.
Okay, thank you. Yes, again, my views exactly the same actually. Good to hear.
I'm glad
that I'm on the right track. And my last question is maybe it's a little bit for trend, but can you make some comments about the cybersecurity issue in shipping and ports actually?
Yeah, definitely. I think when we're on the one hand, we're trying to get more digitalization in our industry, but that of course brings a risk because the more digital, then the more vulnerable you become to cybersecurity issues. And I think we're lagging a bit behind. I mean, ports are lagging a bit behind, I think, compared to our shipping community. I think the shipping community has made further steps already. And in the end, this is about preparing, and I don't think cybersecurity is different for shipping or ports or for any other industry. I think it's an application of the same precautionary measures and common sense actually approach. But we have not established a collective approach for ports yet, whereas for shipping it is there. I mean, the shipping industry, the shipping companies have developed their own guidelines on it. They've also worked with the IMO. But we are sort of missing that for the ports industry. And it's actually something we're working on. We're going to publish, it will be a matter of weeks, cybersecurity white paper for the port sector. Where we're sort of advocating, again, it's not rocket science here. It's the usual precautionary things that you need to take care of. But the thing is with a cyber attack on a port has of course massive implications because you're disrupting a supply chain. And that's why the risk is of course more prominent in our industry maybe than in another industry. But it's the more we want to go digital, of course, the more this has to be on our radar as well. We have a regulatory framework, which is the ISPS code, the International Ship and Port Facility Security Code, which is about security in general. It came after 9/11. It doesn't deal explicitly with cyber. Because it wasn't really, on the radar in those days. But there are guidelines developed on how to implement principles of the ISPS code also for cyber-related risks. And I think that's the angle we need to take as a port industry as well, and to go for a review on and learn from what our shipping colleagues have developed and transpose that also to our sector. I think that's the next stage. As I said, that we're working on, and hopefully we'll get that publication out there in a couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. For my side, there is no questions. I hope others will have more questions, but from my side, thank you.
Thank you. Glad I could answer them.
Thank you, Tõnis and Patrick, for an interesting discussion. We have one question from the audience. How do you see, oh, actually two. The first question is, how do you see the competitiveness of shipping change in the future compared to rail or road transportation?
Yeah, I think that's then really an issue for mostly shorter distances. I think that's the eternal question as to how we can compete short sea shipping better with rail and road transport. It's been also, it's not a new topic. It's been around the mid-90s already, more from a perspective of to deal with congestion on roads and move cargo to, per ton kilometer more environmental friendly modes of transport. Of course, the short sea business is again now strongly affected by the crisis, and we heard stories of Stena Line and P&O and some of these companies that are in great difficulties. So, yeah, I'm not sure what the answer is going to be there if they are so affected by the crisis, whether they will be able to maintain a competitive position towards the more land-based modes of transport. I think it's a bit early to say, but clearly that is a sector which seems to be in particular trouble. If you read the report, P&O is owned by Dubai ports, and they haven't announced anything yet, but I could imagine that they say, well, it wasn't maybe our most important asset anyway. But of course, a ferry and short sea transport also provides an essential service in a way, especially if you're, an island like the UK, or if you're, depending on water transport to a large extent. There are now voices, this is again specific on the P&O case, some people say we should nationalize it again and make it a government service. I'm not sure what's going to happen in that market, but clearly the crisis is affecting. On top of that, you have all the environmental rules that the industry has to deal with, like the low sulfur norm, investment in new fuels and things like that. So I can see a difficult situation there from a competitive point of view. But then again, I'm not so specialist in the road transport. I don't know how they are suffering under the crisis. So that may also have an impact on the competitive position of the shipping side. But promoting short sea shipping has been around for a while, has been difficult. And one of the issues also is that shipping, and that's where digitalization comes in again. Shipping is more burdened, especially in Europe, with administrative rules and the fact that there's not really a common market for shipping, where you do have a common market for road and rail transport. So accelerating things like single window and things like that would certainly improve the competitive position of shipping versus other modes of transport. But that was already the problem before the crisis. So it's an extra argument, you could say, why we need to speed up digitalization in the maritime sector to improve also competitiveness of short sea shipping.
Okay, thank you. The next question concerns reversing the trend of outflagging.
Yes.
Estonia is at the moment reforming its bareboat registers with the aim to increase the number of ships under our flag. What, in your opinion, are the most important factors when choosing between flag, and do you see any changes in these factors in the future?
Yeah, I have to go back to the past, my own past, because I used to work for the European Ship Owners Association before I joined the ports. So I'm not completely up to date anymore on what is happening on that front. But I do recall from my previous career that this is more than just fiscal issues. This is about competitiveness. I mean, a flag, of course, if you compete with open registers, there's the issue of tonnage tax, and there's the issue of alleviation of social security and a number of other fiscal measures that are allowed in Europe under the EU state aid rules. There are specific rules for shipping which allow governments to indeed introduce such measures to be competitive with open registers. But it's actually a broader discussion. It's not only how what sort of money incentives you provide, but also how attractive you are as a flag to the shipping company. That means the ease of doing business, ease of setting up the business, you know, all sorts of facilitations you can provide to grow the shipping cluster. That is actually, and tax and social security is an element of that. But you need to look at it much broader. And why are, you know, clusters like Singapore so successful in drawing away European companies to set up their headquarters over there? It's not only the fiscal situation, because I think the comparisons between those are, I mean, I don't think they're even that different. I mean, okay, everybody has a tonnage tax system and so on, but the real added value lies in, yeah, the ease of setting up your business, the service you get from the government. These things play a very important role. And when I was with the European Ship Owners Association, we had a study published where we actually compared that. We compared the regime that the EU is offering under its state aid guidelines, so which applies to Estonia, which applies to Belgium, you know, any country, any flag in EU. And we compared that with the regimes that Dubai, Singapore, you know, some of the big shipping hubs out there are offering. And I do recall, but it's 4 or 5 years ago, but I do recall that that was one of the major conclusions. And of course, we are not Singapore. We will never be Singapore. It's a city-state where, you know, everybody knows everybody, basically. They're all sort of tied to the government in the end. So they can provide this one-stop shop policy and you know, have ease of doing business and everything in a country or in a European Union with 27 countries. It's not so easy to do the same. If you're a small country where shipping is your, you know, your only concern, yes. But if you're a country like Germany, where many other industries are saying and knocking on the government door and say, we need some help, it's not so easy. So that was the conclusion. But bottom line is, yes, the tax issue is important, and Europe allows it. The stated guidelines, to my knowledge, have not been changed. So I think they're still as they were when I was in that part of the industry. But as a government, you need a more proactive policy to maintain and retain, you know, shipping under your flag and set up business in your country.
Thank you, Patrick. Then the next question concerns digitalization. Mm-hmm. Where lies the main challenge in the digitalization of shipping and ports? What should be the main changes or tasks to boost the digitalization in the shipping business and the whole supply chain?
Yeah, I think it's certainly not the technology, because the technology is, you know, is available. And I mentioned the basic example of a port community system, which, you know, is something that's been around for a while. It's the trust and data collaboration. I think that's the real hurdle, that people trust each other to exchange information, and whether that trust is between commercial parties or between government and commercial parties. That, you know, a good example is port call optimization issue. What is this about? This is really about making sure that a ship, when it arrives at a port, doesn't have to wait until the berth is ready. That means that it would be more efficient, it would be safer also, and you would spend less emissions. So it's a win-win. But why don't we have it? Well, because there are, first of all sorts of contractual and operational complexities, because we're such a diverse community. Fortunately, that has been mapped out now. It's work that's been done under guidance of the IMO as well. But then you need people to agree to share the data and to make them available in time and so on. That's the real problem. The problem is not technology. Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you. The next question from the audience is, the performance of global supply chains hinges on optimization solutions that are used pervasively. Optimization cuts away the slack in the system. Shocks like the COVID-19 are black swan events that would be better handled if the system wasn't overly optimized, as authors such as Nasib Taleb state. As there have been some disruptions, do you think that the global supply chains need to be changed in that regard and somehow made more robust to shocks?
That is a really complicated question. Very good question, but a really complicated. I wouldn't. I wouldn't really have an immediate answer other than, yeah, what I said already. I think one of the issues with the supply chain, and it links a little bit to what I said before, is that it's maybe not so transparent from a customer point of view, or if you're a shipper and you want to move something from A to B. But whether, I'm not sure whether that is, if you want to optimize that more, I'm not sure whether the question is not saying you should keep some slack there in case something happens. I'm not sure I quite understand where the question is going to, but clearly one issue that from a supply chain point of view has to improve is transparency. And it's only a couple of days ago that the digital, it's called the Digital Container Shipping Association, which are actually the major shipping lines, container lines, who work together on digital solutions, have said, well, we need an electronic bill of lading. It's again something bill of lading is the essential, document in maritime trade, but it's not electronic. Although we're talking about it since 1980s, and yeah, to refer to Monty Python again, some call it the Holy Grail of shipping, the electronic bill of lading, and it's some people are looking for it, but we still haven't seemed to have found it. That's an area again which now comes up in crisis. After the crisis, people say, let's now finally get this done. Things that we had so long on the agenda already, let's try to solve them, let's get them implemented. And if this momentum can really be used also politically with the support of governments and intergovernmental organizations, then we might indeed make our supply chain more transparent and more robust in a way.
Do you think we are going to see some deliberate duplication or redundancy built into the change, so that if one part of the chain fails, then we have some sort of backup?
Yeah, I think we're probably also going to see changes in the actors within the chain, which we've already seen a lot of sort of vertical integration. People taking over roles that used to be performed by intermediaries, so like the freight forwarder, the ship agent. It's again something that was already going on. Maybe we'll see more of that in the future. And the question is also, to what extent are like port authorities, and this comes back to the revenue model, and whether port authorities should look for other opportunities within the broader chain than just collect money from ships and lease land to terminal operators. Maybe because they have this overview of what's going on, at least within the port-related chain, maybe they have a role to bring that added value and to bring that transparency and to bring parties together. That's a possibility.
I also have a question about the fuels that you also discussed before. You said that there are developments planned regarding decarbonization of shipping, and that as of yet, we don't have some important decisions in this regard. But I think in the longer term, it's clear that some sort of decision, one way or another, will be made. And if we look a couple of decades in the future, if we imagine the year 2040, for example, and we imagine that new ships are being built for operation in Europe, is there some sort of emerging consensus what fuel will be used in that ship? Is there? You mentioned several options like methanol and so on, but is there some sort of the most likely candidate for the fuel?
Not one, but certainly there is a short list, and I think hydrogen and methanol are probably among the most quoted. Recently, there have been several studies published as to what is going to be the likelihood. And I think the other day, it's only a few days ago, that there was a consortium of Danish companies that said we're going to invest in hydrogen. I see the list becoming smaller as to what the feasible options are going to be, but it depends again on what trade. Because I can imagine that the perfect fuel will maybe be different for a long deep sea trade than for short sea shipping. In some cases, electricity could even come into the picture for very short sort of, and then link it to the automation discussion we had earlier. But deep sea, I see sort of more and more convergence to hydrogen as being most quoted in any case as a solution. The other one, which is already being used, but it's not a complete alternative for clean fuel, is LNG, of course, because there's been already some experience with that on short sea, and now you see deep sea lines, like I think it's CMA or is it MSC, one of them, and also cruise lines that are using LNG. LNG is good for air quality, so it's very good for sulfur and other emissions, but it's not so good for carbon. It's still a fossil fuel. But it's certainly a transitional fuel. I think it's part of the equation, and that is already there. Hydrogen, I think, is still very much in the experimental phase at the moment, and certainly, to my knowledge, nothing happening on deep sea. But you may have read as well that if we want to get the IMO target by 2050, you need the first deep sea vessel on clean marine fuel by 2030. That's 20 years earlier. That's only 10 years from now. Which doesn't only mean you need to have a ship that is ready for it, but you need to have a supply chain as well. You need to have bunkering, you need to have the safety, everything, the regulations that are in place. So that's not so much time. So the sooner industry starts converging on, what is going to be the most likely best fuel from different options, emissions, safety, all the rest of it, the better. And you need a coalition of the willing to get this started. I don't think this is something that, if you have to wait until all the IMO member states agree on it, that may be a very long wait. I think what you need is a few carriers and a few major ports on a specific lane, say Europe, Far East, for instance. You've got 4 or 5 major bunkering ports there, Rotterdam, Fujairah, Singapore, a few others. If they could sort of start piloting with a shipping line, I think that's the way to get the ball rolling.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. We have another question from the audience, or actually a couple of questions.
Oh, okay.
First is that the implementation of rules against money laundering, how is this affecting shipping industry, and what do you expect in this regard from the future?
I must admit that I don't know the answer. I'm not an expert on money laundering. I know a little bit about corruption and how that is being dealt with in the industry now, but that's not exactly the same. I think the corruption focus has more to do with shipping companies that are confronted in ports with customs and other authorities that are asking for money or other advantages in order to get cargo processed and so on. But that's another story. Okay. On money laundering, I'm afraid I can't say anything intelligent.
Another question. What's your opinion regarding Estonian e-services like the e-residency, e-taxation reporting system, e-banking, etc.? Could this be the trigger to attract ship owners to select Estonia as the flag state?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the package is in Estonia of e-serve, but clearly that's part of what I meant in terms of ease of setting up business, ease of doing business, and government facilitating that. That is clearly an important element.
Okay. Then we don't have at the moment questions from the audience. If I can conclude with a somewhat very general question, I don't even know if it's so meaningful to answer, but when we consider ports, not some big major regional hubs, but smaller ports like we have on this side of the Baltic, what will be the most important determinants of competitiveness in the future? If our Estonian ports want to remain competitive on this side of the Baltic, what should they do? Are the factors going to be different? What should they keep in mind in the coming decades? Yeah,
competitiveness, I think for a port, there are different elements, but I think one of them is location, of course, and proximity to the market. That's almost the most important factor, and that's not always a factor that you have influence on. But that's a key issue. How close are you to markets in Europe, in this case, or in the Baltic in this case? Other elements that play a role is your accessibility, both from the maritime, from the shipping side, and from the land side. Your connectivity, how well is that guaranteed? And then it's your service. I mean, what are you offering that is different from the basic package of services as a port? I think it's those three layers, and your reliability as well, which is linked to your service capacity. But the unknown factor, well, is also what is the strategy of the shipping community going to be? Again, post-COVID, some people say there will be more mergers and acquisitions in the industry, there will be more consolidation, but I also hear people say probably not, at least not for the next 5-10 years, because it didn't happen after the financial crisis either. But that can often make you, from being a central point on a loop, all of a sudden, the company or there's a merger or a new alliance, and you lose it. You lose the traffic. But if you are well connected and close to a market, and that could be a local market, and maybe your business should not be so much in the deep sea game, but your business should be in the niche. Should be more focused on short sea traffic or so on, whereas probably there could be more money or more revenue into that than try to compete with the global hubs. So I think these are choices that you have to make depending on where is your business, where is your market, your end market. I mean, I don't mean the shipping line itself, but what is sort of your commodity that goes through your port. And there are examples of ports that said we're not entering the container market because it's a rat race, it's a race to the bottom. There's no money to be there, but we prefer to be focused on industry or on local logistics, or so these are sort of choices that you need to make first of all before you can say how can we improve our competitiveness. It's a very general answer, I'm afraid.
Okay. But thank you very much for a very interesting presentation and discussion. Thank you for taking the time to.
It was a pleasure.
From your busy schedule to participate in this webinar, and thanks also to Tõnis and to all of the audience who have been listening. And thank you very much. And I hope.
Thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure. I hope to be in Tallinn, really in Tallinn soon, when it's possible again.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sten. Thank you, Tõnis. Thank you, Kadri. And thank you to everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.